As soon as I unlocked the Archon archetype in Remnant 2, I knew I wanted to build a class that could abuse mods and the damage we get from those mods by finding a way to use those mods as much as possible, as often as possible, and create a situation where we can get the most possible damage out of those mods by pairing it with another good archetype. At the same time, I'm also a huge fan of Outriders, more specific the Pyromancer, which is a class in Outriders, so I figured, you know what, let's create Pyromancer 2.0. Let's go.
Nuclear launch detected.
So exactly as mentioned, we are using the Archon archetype in our Prime slot because we want to benefit from the Prime perk Tempest, which basically says automatically generate 3 mod power per second, and casting a mod increases our mod generation by 100% for 10 seconds. My objective with this build was 100% to have mods be available all the time and essentially see how many times I could use the same mod while the previous one is potentially still up. This will make a lot more sense when you see the choices in mods that I've had, but just to have a huge amount of fun with these mods and just push out as much of this mod damage as we can. And when it comes to the skills that are available, I think this is dealer's choice. We have some excellent options here with the Archon. We can of course protect ourselves with this bubble here. We can increase our damage with Chaos Gate, but also take more damage. And we can also use the Havoc form, which has recently been nerfed. Unfortunately, it's not as sick as it used to be, but make no mistake, it's still pretty damn good. In the case of this particular build, and the footage that you'll be seeing in the background is you'll see me using the Chaos Gate every once in a while. Generally speaking, you should only use this when you are relatively safe where you are, and you can essentially stay there a while inside that circle and push your mod damage out, because you have to of course be inside that circle. And as mentioned, do bear in mind that of course you will take additional damage as you're in there. Now, the whole idea of the Archon archetype, of course, is just boosting your mod damage and your mod regeneration. So all of the perks essentially just, help for that. And then last but not least, the archetype trait we have here is that it increases your mod and skill casting speed by 50%, which just means that you can essentially just do those a lot faster while you're moving around. But, in the end, not like the most fantastic archetype trait, but, it is what it is. Now, I've chosen to partner this with the Summoner trait for 2 reasons. The first one being that the Summoner trait itself actually also does boost mod and skill damage. So it pairs well with the idea that I'm trying to do here, and that is that we want to get as much mod damage as possible as we can. And hey, we're also getting additional skill damage, so cool shit. The second reason is because we will have a minion, this will be something that could potentially draw the aggro off of us and give us an opportunity to, for example, use the Chaos Gate, because now we're not necessarily being harassed by enemies. When it comes to your choice of minion, really you have 2 options here. You have the Flyer and you have the Reaver. Both of these are good in certain situations. Definitely, you do not want to be picking these guys. They suck ass. But the point is that with the Flyers, this works in open areas where, like for instance, if you're out in Yeisha and the jungle and stuff like that, because it gives them a little bit of room to maneuver. They don't work that well in close quarters, because what often happens is they tend to hover over your shoulders, which means that when you aim down sight over your shoulder, they might be right next to you in your firing line, and that can sometimes cause a situation where you actually hit them in the back and obviously set yourself on fire, or shoot them dead or something like that. But the main reason we want it is because of Dominator, so we get this additional mod and damage. Now, as a bonus here, our trait when we pick the Summoner archetype is that we get Regrowth, and Regrowth gives us increased health regeneration. Now, this isn't the most tankiest of builds, and there's things that we can do to increase our survivability a little bit, but this definitely does help, because any little amount of damage you take along the way will actually be regened by this if you just stay out of trouble. I'm moving us over to the character sheet, and let me just move my camera over to this side here. And just looking at the gear that we have here, I still have the same setup that I had for the previous build that I had on the channel, and that is of course the Leto Mark II helmet, the Cultist Duster, the Realm Walker pantaloons, and the Leto Mark II gloves. The reason why I picked this configuration is because it gets us relatively close to the weight limit that we're allowed, 50, which means that we still have our normal dodge with a 25% cost penalty, but it also gives us relatively the highest amount of armor, at least in the selection of items that are available to me, to be able to get us close to a high amount of armor and some good damage reduction. The other thing that I really like about this is we have some really impressive resistances here with the 7, 6, 7, 8, 7, which means that we're relatively covered against each one of these in some way. Now, firstly, let's talk about our relic here, and in this case, I oftentimes use the resonating relic, the resonating heart, because this regenerates 50% of your max health over 5 seconds, and then when this heal ends, any additional health that might have hit you as an overheal is doubled and also trickles into your health pool over the next 20 seconds. So it's just a fantastic way to drip feed health into you. Now, of course, this doesn't give you a huge amount of healing at once. If you're looking for something like that, it's probably better to use another relic. When it comes to my shards that I'm using on here, I'm using flawless elemental damage. Any case, use whatever you have. Some people I've seen have mythic already, some have solid, whatever you've managed to farm up. In my case, I've managed to get as high as flawless. I'm using elemental damage because we are going to be dealing a lot of elemental damage. I'm using mod damage because, of course, our mods are what are doing the elemental damage. And then last but not least, I'm also just reducing the mod cost, which means even faster, or faster, let's say, regeneration, so we can activate it. So then getting us onto the weapons itself, I'm using the pulse rifle on here. You can use any weapon because we are after the mod here. Just pick whichever weapon you have that you're able to equip this mod on, and whichever has the highest amount of, like plus 20, plus 15, whatever, because that, helps the damage scale, of course. I use the pulse rifle because I think the pulse rifle's badass, but you can use pretty much anything on here. If you like using a shotgun or a sniper rifle or whatever, go for it. Now, the main star of the build here is Firestorm, and this is the reason why I created this build in the first place, and this is why I made this whole comment about the Pyromancer. The point is, this build is able to clear out entire rooms of enemies with one shot, as all enemies will essentially be pulled in, sucked into this vortex of the Firestorm, and these burn ticks will just basically decimate them completely. The other benefit of this is because of this vacuum effect, this has a huge advantage against enemies that are trying to stalk you down or walk you down. This even works on some bosses that are very mobile and move around the map, because this will actually stop them in place as they are stuck inside this vortex. I do also want to mention at this point in time that you can also get stuck in this vortex, but we're going to talk a little bit about the bad shit that can happen to you when you use this build. We'll get to that. Fuck! So Firestorm here is really good. Basically, you shoot this, pellet, it flies with a little bit of an arc. It explodes. It can bounce off stuff, so you can bounce it around corners and things like that. It explodes. It starts sucking the enemies in and fucking burns them to crisp. Good shit. We pair this with Harmonizer because Harmonizer increases our mod damage by an additional 20%. And then we also generate additional 25% mod power for stowed weapons. So when we switch to our secondary, which I'll explain just now, then this is also going to allow us to just get mod power back faster, so we can just follow up with another shot. Now in the setup, and when we look at the rings and the amulets and everything like that, the point of this build is I don't want to be shooting one of these firestorms every 30 seconds. I want to be shooting one every 2 seconds. And that's essentially what this setup allows you to do. When it comes to the melee slot, I don't really give a shit. I'm using this Edge of the Forest plus 20 on here. It's my only melee weapon that I've leveled up. And I'm using the Striker mod on here, which hasn't been leveled up or anything like that. Basically, this build, kind of like you don't want to be fighting stuff, hand to hand, but this is there just in case you need to, cut someone's fucking head off. Now, for our secondary, our handgun, I'm using the MP60R here, or the submachine gun. We basically need any weapon that allows us to slot the mod in here. Again, pick whatever you are comfortable with, and this should be your weapon that you use when the other mod for some reason is on cooldown, or it is not safe for you to use Firestorm because you're stuck in a fucking broom closet, and using it now will basically blow you up as well. So in this case, you have two options here. For your mod here, you can stick with the fire theme and you can use something like Hotshot. I think that's perfectly fine, and Hotshot really does put in the work, and it, like I said, thematically it kind of like sticks with the build and you're essentially burning everything down. However, if you want to get a little bit spicy and you want to make things a little bit more interesting, you can use corrosive rounds, because this introduces another status and another element into the mix here, and essentially allows you to have double of this essentially running on enemies that are a little bit tougher and actually survive through this onslaught of fire that you're basically heaping onto them. The other benefit we also have is that corrosive rounds also increases your range critical chance. So if you are actually shooting at enemies, you might also crit every once in a while, and that's just going to be additional damage for yourself. I pair this with the feedback item here, which basically says that using this weapons mod generates 20% of a single charge value as a passive mod power over 10 seconds. And if you level this up to level 10, it says mod damage generates 10% of damage dealt as mod power. So this weapon, your handgun here, is just an additional way for you to feed as much as possible mod regeneration and power onto your primary weapon, because the real workhorse here is going to be those firestorms, especially in situations where something doesn't die to one or two of them, where you can just heap these firestorms pellets onto stuff, like in the case of bosses, that you can just keep throwing these on them and have like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of these things essentially running at once, which will just melt any enemy that is standing inside it at that point in time. Taking us over to our Amulet and Rings, of course we want to be using the Jester's Bell here. This increases our mod and skill cast speed by 35%, which is kind of cute, but casting a skill or mod increases all of your damage by 20% for 15 seconds is the actual effect that we are after. Now, you are constantly going to be activating mods, whether it's you using your submachine gun and activating corrosive or hotshot, or whether it's you firing firestorm after firestorm. So this bonus, this 20% additional damage, is pretty much going to be active the entire time. And this is all damage. So this will affect the burn ticks, this will affect the actual hits, the shots that you take, the corrosive damage, acid, all of this damage is increased by this. So all in all, good. In our first ring here, and honestly, I kind of feel like this build is going to perform a lot worse, or is going to not perform as well. I don't know which way to fucking say it, but it's not going to be as sexy if you don't use the Stone of Malevolence. I think there's ways for you to get around this by potentially stacking some other items on you, but the main point is that this allows you to regenerate so much mod power, because elemental damage generates 15% additional mod power. So all of these, like when you shoot a firestorm and you set like 2 guys on fire, you will instantly regenerate back enough to get another firestorm out. In the case of a boss or an enemy that's standing still inside this fire, you're gonna just tick 2 or 3 times on that enemy, even if there's only 1 enemy available, and you will have your firestorm available again. And that's not taking into account all of the additional other ways in which we're heaping mod power back onto this build. So you are constantly gonna have access to these firestorms. Your only real issue is gonna be staying alive long enough to essentially use them as much as possible. Then when we move over to the second ring, we use the Stone of Balance. This is just a flat 7% all damage increase for us, which is really, really good. We use Shard Banded Ring on here, which gives us increased mod damage of 12%. Mods are our main way of doing damage with this build, so this is of course super helpful. And then last but not least, we use Timekeeper's Jewel on here, which says that this increases the duration of all status effects applied by the wearer. Duration varies per status. Now, this, I feel like this is an open slot, and you can use any other ring on here that could potentially give you more survivability. Maybe you put something on there that gives you more armor or more resistances, or gives you more regeneration, or you know, whatever else. This is your free slot here. The reason why I put this on here is because this actually allows the corrosive that comes from corrosive rounds here, the corroded effect, to actually stay on the enemy for twice as long, which is really good. It's just additional damage that's ticking off on this enemy, and you know, it just helps overall with just producing a higher damage volume on the enemy. Then moving us over to the traits. Of course, we are getting Flash Caster, and we're getting Regrowth from our 2 archetypes. The first place where you should be dropping some points into is Kinship. Kinship reduces friendly fire damage dealt and received by 80%. And this is essentially super needed if you have any hope of surviving with this build. The fire that you get from Firestorm can actually set you on fire as well. Plus, it sets your minion on fire, whichever minion you have. And so this can very easily kill you in situations where you misjudge getting close to the fire, you get sucked into it. Let me be very clear here. With the setup that I'm going to show you here and the rest of the traits, it'll start making sense to you. But the point is, you are going to set yourself on fire a lot, number 1. And number 2, there's going to be fire fucking everywhere. So you need to be able to just survive some of that. And the difference between not having this trait active and having it active is huge. 80% is a lot. And this means that you can actually have situations where you can stand within your own firestorm and fight enemies and set them on fire, and they'll die before you die, which means you win. So absolutely kinship, super important to get. If you plan on using this build while playing with buddies, trust me, they will thank you, because otherwise you'll be setting their asses on fire as well. Then we get swiftness. I get swiftness on all of my builds because I just like the additional 15% movement speed. If that's not something that you care about, then of course you can skip it for something else. But being able to zip around the battlefield to avoid damage, but also just to get from A to B is huge, and I'm a big fan. Then we definitely pick up vigor, because the extra 30 HP here for sure helps us with survivability. A lot of the footage that you've been seeing in the background has been a mixture of survivor, nightmare, and apocalypse, but essentially any additional survivability you can give yourself regardless is always a good thing. So this additional HP absolutely helps. We also do get our spirit trait here, but this gives us 20% additional mod power generation. Now in testing this, I feel like this is potentially, I could shave some of these points off and maybe go to 10% and put another 5 points somewhere else, because we are getting so much additional mod power regeneration that this might be something that we could rather spend elsewhere. So absolutely, your mileage may vary. Maybe you don't have some of the items that I've discussed so far, so maybe your mod generation is not that good and then you need this, but this is a good way for you to just stack on that. Then we're also using amplitude, and this is the difference, or this is the reason why you might have tried to use firestorm and thought, well, that's kind of cute, but it's a little itty bitty fire, like what the fuck is this? And then you shoot firestorm with this shit with 50% increased AoE size, and it fucking lights up the entire screen and 2 rooms worth of enemies and literally burns everything to a crisp. So this is insane. I think I definitely went overboard by taking 50% AoE size. Oftentimes, like I said, this makes it impossible to traverse a certain area because literally the entire fucking planet is on fire. But you can of course tailor this and maybe drop it down to halfway, like something like 25% or 30% should still be fine. But at 50%, that suck zone that is in the middle of this firestorm is massive and will pull enemies in as soon as they enter in an area. And this is a phenomenal way how you can just lock down entire rooms. So in a situation where you are fighting enemies that are coming at you from 2 different angles, you can shoot the firestorm into one side and then turn to the other side and mop them up with a submachine gun, and nobody will ever come close to you. I do use bark skin on here as well because this gives me another 10% of damage reduction. Again, like I said, this isn't the tankiest of builds, so if you are playing higher difficulties with this build, you have to be a little bit more comfortable with the dodge mechanics in the game and being able to avoid damage and so on. But there are, of course, like I said, ways that you can increase your durability, increase your chance of surviving some damage, and bark skin 100% is that. Then last but not least, you'll have a couple of points over. This is, of course, we also have 5 additional points now since the most recent patch. 60 total trait points is what we had before. We have 65 now, so I did put up rugged in here as well. As mentioned, I do use Mr. Reaver over here, and that absolutely gives him a large health pool. Honestly, I feel like I do far much damage to him than the enemies do, because oftentimes he'll run in and fight enemies, and then I'll put a firestorm right in front of him, which will set the enemies on fire and set him on fire, and then I switch to the submachine gun and I shoot a bunch of fucking corroded bullets through him. So I feel like this is just a way of giving back to the Reaver, giving him a little bit more HP. But of course, these you can swap them around. Potentially, if you are using the flying minions, then those maybe might stay out of damage a little bit more, but then again, they also have a much smaller health pool, so then this might be even more important. So either which way, you can sort of like play around with this, but to me, this felt like it made the Reaver strong enough that it could tank bosses, it could stick around, and it could take all of this additional damage that I'm throwing onto its poor back. And that's it for the build. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you. I definitely think that in Remnant 2, there's an opportunity for us to have builds that are good at pushing very difficult content, builds that are good at solo, builds that are good in co-op, and then I do believe that there's a 4th category here, which are builds that are just ridiculously fun and just do stupid things. And this build is fairly lethal, but it definitely falls into that 4th category as well. I've had a hell of a lot of fun playing with this and just essentially setting the whole world on fire. And I hope you do the same. Please go ahead and let me know in the comments down below, or how you would change this and how you would tailor this. If you've tried something like this, how much fun you had doing it. If you found the video useful in any way, please consider giving it a like, as well as subbing to the channel if you enjoy build videos like this or more content like this. I will be covering Remnant 2, you know, a lot, and there's a lot more builds coming. I'm working on another 2 right now, and I'm basically leveling up as fast as I can with the things so that I can actually put them into build videos for you guys. But other than that, it's just super important to me that you have a fantastic morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. Till next video, fucking cheers.